Welcome. Thank you guys all for joining us at our February general meeting of the League. For those who I haven't met, my name is Skylar Frank. I'm the president of the Urban League of London, and I'm joined by a couple board members, as well as Andira, who is staff right now, who's our communications support. So she'll be helping with any technical things for the meeting. We do ask, if possible, if you can keep your mics muted unless you're asking questions. This is a fairly open space, so feel free to pop off mute as needed if there are questions throughout the presentation. That is always welcome. And I would like to start off by acknowledging that we are gathering on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Lenape peoples, and we're upriver from current Indigenous communities Chippewa, the Thames First Nation, Munsee Delaware Nation, and Oneida Nation of the Thames. And at the League, we really strive to foster a welcoming environment for all our members and the London community. So we're really happy to have you, and we just encourage really respectful dialogue because lots of us are coming here tonight with various opinions. And now I will pass it over to Marina, who is going to be introducing our guest speaker for the evening. And I'll also put our agenda in the chat in just a second so you can follow along.
Hi everyone, my name is Marina. I'm the Vice President at the Urban League, and thank you all for joining us today. It's my pleasure to introduce Luis Patricio today, to joining us to talk about the global goals in a local context and the role of cities in achieving a just and sustainable future. So a little bit about Luis. He's been working with the UN Sustainable Development Goals since 2018. Currently, he is one of the co-leads for the Sustainable Development Goals for cities and a part-time teacher at Huron University College. In a previous life, Luis lived in Brazil, and in 2016, he chose to become a Canadian, and he moved to London. He's a father of 3, and he hasn't owned a car since 2007, so great job on that. He uses a bike as his main mode of transportation and as a tool to transform our cities into better places. One of his burning questions is, how can we enhance and share urban experiences? Luis holds a master's in urban management and a bachelor's in computer science, and he's now pursuing his PhD in researching urban literacy. So I'm going to just pass it over to Luis. He's got a great presentation for us, and if you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat, and we'll take a look at them as we go along. Thanks, Luis.
Thanks, Marina, for the introduction. Thanks for the invitation, and glad to be here. I was just talking to Andira when we joined a few minutes earlier that it's so nice when we get to meet people in person, but it's still a good experience to meet a lot of you folks online. So as Marina mentioned, my name is Luis Patricio. I think I'm just gonna go and share my screen because I do have a presentation. In my neighborhood, by the way, my neighborhood is ham and eggs for the locals. If someone doesn't know what that means, ham and eggs is Hamilton and Egerton Road. So it's Ward 1. All right, let's see if I can make this work. My presentation. Share. Can everybody see that? Hands up. Yeah, thank you. By the way, I'm very bad at checking the chat, and I want to say that I want to make this more of a conversation. So if anyone has a question and you asking in the chat, you can just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the question, or someone, maybe Andira or Marina or Skylar, if you notice something, you guys are more flexible with just, hey, Luis, there's a question for you. I'm happy to answer questions. So yeah, as Marina introduced me, I'm working at Pillar Nonprofit Network, and I coordinate the SDG Cities program. We're trying to integrate the SDGs into organizations in different sectors. And I'm happy to be here and talking about SDGs. A couple of other hats that I wear, start teaching in Huron, also about the SDGs in the Governance, Leadership, and Ethics program. And some of you who do know me, and as per Marina's introduction, cycling is a big part of who I am and what I do. I imagine that we would have a land acknowledgement at the beginning of the meeting, but I didn't want to also start my presentation with recognizing that the SDG agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, are also deeply connected with truth and reconciliation. Just a reminder, last year, Bill C-15, also known as the UNDRIP Act, received royal assent and became law here in Canada. So now our law needs to be consistent with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And this will probably take some work to adjust our Canadian laws to be in line with UNDRIP. There's several calls to action that mention the UNDRIP document, but I want to specifically mention calls 43 and 44 that request a national plan and full implementation of UNDRIP. And the SDGs as a framework from the United Nations as well can and should leverage that commitment to those calls. As a measurement, the SDGs is basically a measurement framework, more than having specific indicators about Indigenous people. I think this is an opportunity to re-examine the governance model of SDG agenda and really how we shift from this compartmentalized view of the world and doing and deciding things to a more holistic view. So a couple of three things I will talk about: Canada, the global agenda, the SDGs as a global agenda, and obviously the role in our local context here in Canada and specifically in London. And before I dive into the SDGs, just want to take you all on a little road trip to a city we've never been before. But we believe that that place is really good. We have lots of evidence. A lot of friends told us that, you know, this is a great place. It's the kind of place that we're definitely going to have a good time. So we got a car for this trip. And then we noticed that this car doesn't have a GPS. And then we're thinking, well, that's okay. I'll just use the good old paper map. Then we noticed that it doesn't have a gas meter either, or it doesn't have a speedometer for that matter. And the car looks like that, like it doesn't have a dashboard. And then we think, well, that's weird. Why would we not have such basic devices to get us from point A to point B to really guide us that way? It will make things easier and even safer, knowing how fast we're going, how much gas do we have. So we decided to take the trip anyway. It'll be a bit unpredictable because we don't know exactly our speed or when we need to stop for gas, and maybe the roads we're going there for the first time. We've never been there. But we can get there, like we're confident we can get there. It can take longer, but we can get there. And we know it's worth it because it's a great place. We want to be there. So we decided to do the trip anyway. And that little story is, it might sound a bit absurd to even have a car and doing a trip like this. But it's surprising that's how we run a lot of our organizations and sometimes even cities without a dashboard. So they know cities and organizations, like they know the destination, they know the great place that they want to be, right? And you can name that. We have so many plans. We want a sustainable city. We want a just city. We want clean air. We want, a place where our kids can grow and thrive. But we never been there, and we know for sure that it's a good place, and we're probably right. but we're not measuring in a clear way. We don't have this dashboard to tell us how fast we're moving towards that destination, and how much resources we have and how we're allocating those resources. Sometimes those things are not super clear. So of course, this is, a car dashboard is a much simpler mechanism, but there's still feasible ways to have a city dashboard. And this is basically what the SDGs are as a measurement system. It's a shared language, it's a measurement tool. And notice that this is not about how to drive the car or how to maintain the car. The SDGs, they're not going to tell you how to implement equity and diversity plans, or what the actions to take to curb climate change. Just as a dashboard would not help you change your tires for you. They might tell you that they need to be changed though, but they're not telling you how to do it. So the same thing as the SDGs, they are this tool to help measure how we're moving, how fast we're moving in the direction we're moving. So my talk today is how about to build that dashboard, how to read that dashboard, and even how those different indicators affect each other. And I want to add that also, when you're talking about dashboard, it's not just about getting faster and easier to a destination. A good dashboard actually fosters collaboration. So imagine you have a car and you share this car and you don't have a dashboard. You don't know how much gas it has, but because you drove it last time, you kind of have an idea that you need to fill up the tank. But if you're sharing that car with other people, other drivers in your household, that person doesn't know. So you need to leave that person a note. And just having the dashboard makes things so much easier. You hop in the car, you see the dashboard. Okay, I need to put gas. But if you don't have that information, then it hinders collaboration. The other thing is shared accountability. Even when you have the speedometer in your car and you're driving at the speed limit in any road, and someone is going faster than you, then you know that person is above the speed that should be going, even though you can't read their dashboard. So having a shared way of measuring things really create that shared accountability, because we can see the roles that each one of us is playing, whatever we're measuring, whether it's riding a car or driving a car or managing a city. So here's our Canadian national SDG dashboard. It has our SDG status. You have the 17. I'm not going into detail and explain the SDGs. You guys can go find that on the internet. There's a lot of information about them, the targets and the goals. It's just an overview of how you're faring in terms of the 17 goals. You can take a look. The green ones are the ones that are technically we're doing better. The red ones were, it's a red flag. And there are a few numbers at the top. It says that we are in terms of ranking, we are the 21st, we're in 21st place out of 165 countries. Important to note that we are the 6th, I believe, richest country, but in terms of sustainable development, we're 21st. SDG index score, again, it's just a measure to place us in that 21st place. And the spillover score is actually the impact that we have in other countries. So the higher that score, the better your positive impact is in other countries. And it's interesting to note that also there's a trend between what we call the developed countries or countries in the global north. They have a lower spillover score, meaning that they have a more negative impact in the rest of the world than the countries in the global south. This is what the information comes from. There's a data hub from the government of Canada, Statistics Canada, and you can notice there not all the indicators have data. Some has some of that data is not available, the reason for that not all indicators are available. There's a few different reasons. One of them is that some indicators that just, and here are a few of the indicators, and I chose intentionally some of the indicators that might not make a lot of sense. Some of the indicators that just don't make sense in a national context. Some indicators don't make sense in the Canadian context. Others are just super hard to measure to get that data. And because those are not always relevant to Canada, here's what the government of Canada decided. Effective measurement is the key element in monitoring progress toward achieving the SDGs. With the global indicator framework is designed to measure progress at a global level. A successful implementation of the SDGs requires that each country define what constitutes success in its national context. So that's what they did. And here's the Canadian indicator framework. They have different measures, different indicators, different metrics. Here are some of them. And you can see that they really speak, they're more tailored to Canada and our national context. This is what we call, the SDG nerds called SDG Localization. It basically means that we need to translate those goals that are in the global context to a more local context. And based on the same logic, it also applies to cities and subnational levels. So a lot of the national indicators, they also need to be translated to a more, like a smaller scale. And this is like just some images to illustrate what that means. Like when you think about roads and transportation, when you think about our public spaces and zoning codes, solid waste, we're facing a huge problem here in London right now. Urban development, a lot of those things. There's a picture of the birds, and maybe some of you know that we became a bird-friendly city, and a lot of work of their municipal government is putting into that and publicizing that information. So a lot of those things really, not only the resources come from municipal government, but also the decision is made at the municipal level and at City Hall. Laura is probably an expert in a lot of those topics, as she's been attending a lot of those meetings. Just to give an example on how this relates to the SDGs, this is from the Climate Emergency Action Plan. It's just a list of some of the topics that are under the jurisdiction of the city and how that relates to some of the SDGs. You can see a lot of them relate to SDG 11, which makes sense, Sustainable Cities and Development Goals. It's one of those. And then a few more, another reason to localize the SDGs is that obviously there's no framework that is perfect. There are always room for improvement, and there are gaps in the original global framework. Those are some of the gaps that we identified. Obviously, like here in London, we have the urban agriculture strategy, and in the original framework, agriculture is really framed as a rural issue, and obviously we need to address this in an urban context, and a few other topics that you can see that are relevant to our cities. This is part of a report that we published a couple of years ago when I was working at the London Poverty Research Center, and here's the link if you want to get more information from that. One more reason to make the case or why those global goals make sense, a lot of sense at the local context. This is a publication from the Brookings Institute that states that no country voluntary national review. This is a document, a report that the country puts together to present to the United Nations. They combine the data from their leaving no one behind analysis with an examination of the physical location of those populations and or locally led efforts to reach them. So it's interesting that leave no one behind is one of the principles that the SDGs, but usually when we talk about leave no one behind, we're talking about including all different genders, all different ages, ethnicities, immigrant status, citizenship, and all those different social demographic variables. But we do not consider place-based if you think in terms of Canada, you know, the opportunities we provide to our kids are very different in the East Coast and the West Coast. The way that we treat our elders in rural settings are very different from urban settings. There are challenges that are specific to places and cities and provinces that usually is not addressed in the SDGs. And again, that's one of the reasons that it's important to look at them at the local level and have metrics and solutions that needs to be place-based. And by the way, the voluntary national review from Canada is from 2018. So definitely in our review, we didn't take that into account. So I hope you can see the importance, the important role that we can play towards sustainable development. As we share global challenges, it's important to understand that not only there's a different set of solutions and metrics for each, like in different parts of the world, but also the challenges, they show up very differently in cities around the world. So now I'll talk about a little bit about the SDGs and how they show up in cities in Canada. I just want to ask if anyone has a question, maybe take a quick look at the chat and see if there's anything there.
There's a question for you there in the chat, Luis. The question is curious about the link between SDG stats, global impact footprint, and the legacy of structural adjustment policies, courtesies of the World Bank and the IMF.
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, this is the global level, and I'll focus more on the SDGs at the local level. But it's interesting looking at the indicators at the regional global framework. There are some indicators that do address some of those structural changes that actually needs to be implemented, and even in terms of international trade and the finance of the agricultural financing from different countries. There are a few things addressing there, but obviously it's a framework, like we need to recognize there's a framework put together by nation leaders of 193 nations. So there is a lot of compromise in those indicators, and obviously it's the perspective from those global leaders in the framework. Any other questions? Any comments? All right, so a few examples here in Canada. Winnipeg, and I have the links. I can share that presentation later if you want to take a look at that. Winnipeg is kind of one of the main leaders in SDG localization in Canada. They have a site called mypeg.ca. I think that's the link that I have there. And they recently published their voluntary local review. So it's a report that puts together their work around the SDGs. Kelowna already published a voluntary local review last year, so they were the first. They were the first city publishing a voluntary local review. Peterborough is an interesting example because they really center Indigenous voices when they're going through the SDG process. They really brought them together and really thought about how the governance and even the consultation with the community, the engagement with the community, and the issues raised as the priority ones really brought Indigenous communities to look at those. Waterloo has been using SDGs as part of aligned with their strategic plan for a few years now, and they just released a series of 11 videos. So it's interesting to see how they're framing the discourse around the economic growth, development, equity and inclusion, and climate change plans around the SDGs throughout the series of 11 videos. So how London is doing and how London relates to the SDGs. Well, I'm pretty sure all of you heard about the Unesco City of Music Award. And UNESCO, obviously part of the United Nations system. The creative cities, there are 7 types of creative cities. One of them is City of Music. So the Creative Cities Network, it's part of the SDG, how they call it, the SDG agenda or the 2030 agenda. And the ultimate goal of the Creative Cities Network and the UNESCO designation is to achieve sustainable development. So this is I got from the City of London website that says that member cities of the Creative Cities Network also commit to leading the charge towards implementing the 2030 agenda for sustainable development at the local level. So interesting to see how this align and how bring the SDG closer to the work that the city is doing right now. This is a mapping that was done by City Studio London with students from the Western students last year, I believe. So they mapped the London plan to the SDGs, and you can see that from the 17, almost all of them are addressed in the London plan, and how many goals and directions and strategies are mapped into the plan. This is the London Community Recovery Framework. They just published the report a few months ago, I believe, November last year, and showing also again how the SDGs relate to some of the plan. At least 10 SDGs can be identified within the plan. So we're doing great, right? Like we have the Unesco, we're connected with the SDGs, our plans are mapping all the SDGs there, or most of them are mapped there. And we're doing a good job. We're connected with the SDGs. And this is a quote from one of the videos from Waterloo, from Professor Bob Gibson. And he says, much of what we do is to put things in boxes. Sustainability is essentially about transcending, and it's more about the connection than the pieces. So the UNESCO quote, it's actually a copy and paste from the Canadian Commission at UNESCO. I don't believe, at least that's my understanding, that the city is not actively using the SDGs as a framework currently. But you can still ask Luis, we already have those plans and they are addressing all the SDGs. So isn't that what we want? Like what's the point? Do we need to do anything more? And it's true, like those are big plans. And you have many others, like it could, the community diversity and inclusion strategy, the community safety and well-being, transportation master plan. There are many, they're comprehensive. They're really dedicated people to put those plans together. But I want to take a closer look in a couple of those plans. So this is the London Community Recovery Framework. In one of the shared commitments, is with climate change and environmental sustainability. They also had one of the principles to be equity, diversity, and inclusion. And this is how it says, this is what it says about their commitment to the climate emergency. But when we take a closer look at the indicators, and we have the indicators here, the list of indicators here. If you look at 5.2, climate change, environmental sustainability, there's only one indicator in the plan that actually address climate change, and what they're actually measuring is GHG emissions. And it's important to notice that there are many more things that address environmental sustainability other than just GHG emissions. And this is just a few of those. And the other indicators present in the plan, they actually don't acknowledge the environmental impact that they could have in all those different aspects of environmental sustainability. And another disconnect with that plan is that even though they mention when they're talking about climate change within the London Community Recovery Framework Plan, that there is a economic opportunity to address the climate change and promoting green jobs and things like that, and the circular economy. The indicators provided in the plan and the description actually do not measure or go into more depth. So there is a awareness that there is a need to connect those things, but it's hard to go beyond the acknowledgement that those things are connected and to actually measure and to actually implement actions that will address recovery, which has a focus on economic, well, COVID recovery, but a clear focus on economic recovery, but also address environmental and social issues. And then from the other side, we just had the draft plan, the Climate Emergency Action Plan. And one of the principles is bring everyone along. And again, it's recognizing that the environmental and social issues are connected. And here's how they state how they're putting that principle into practice in the plan. And within the scope of the climate emergency plan, they're really addressing inequality, but it's future focus. So the things that might happen due to climate change. So things like vulnerable populations, they might be more susceptible to damage. They don't have the means for climate adaptation to, buy an electric vehicle or like retrofit their home. And they might have a harder time to recover from any of those impacts of climate emergency. However, it doesn't recognize the inequality that already exists in our city. And to be fair, like how could it? Because the friendly version, it's a document with over 100 pages, and it has, I believe, 13 supporting documents. But I do want to give, and I want to keep the GHG emissions as kind of the link, because it's the same indicator from the other plan, the recovery network plan. A lot of emphasis is put into electric vehicles. And then we see that from the climate emergency perspective, we would have a reduction in GHG emissions. But then it's important to consider how all those other aspects will be addressed: traffic collision, urban sprawling, access to workplaces, parking requirement, poverty reduction. If you think that to own a car, we spend on average $10,000 here in Ontario, and for an electric vehicle, it's probably higher than that. How people could lift out of poverty just by not making almost like mandatory to own a car, to be able to just live in the city and have access to job, entertainment, education, and all the things that the city has to offer. Again, just to give an example of the importance of not connecting those things, not just at the high level, at the principle level, but when it trickles down to the action plan and the metrics, those things needs to be connected as well. So I really just want to be clear here. Like I truly believe that the people working on those plans, they are really working hard. They're working around the clock, and each one of those challenges, climate change, COVID recovery, health and well-being crisis, they're very complex and they overlap. So to expect that each one of those plans map and address their issues in their area, and on top of that, integrate with all the other plans, it's not realistic. We really need a framework that can oversee those plans and connect them differently. So like right now we have too many boxes, and usually they reference each other, but in a more superficial level. So instead of a car without dashboards, like imagine that we now have a car with multiple dashboards. They are in different places. So you need to look at different, maybe it's in front of us, maybe it's just multiple dashboards that sometimes even have the same indicator. They even have the same metrics. And even within those plans, some of those indicators are also, some of those metrics are also isolated. They're also siloed in. Just picking an example here, the one indicator from the London Community Recovery Framework for food security is London food bank use. And I'm not saying that it's a good one or it's a bad one, but I think it's important as we use an indicator, not to think about that one as just food security, but try to think of how that impacts all the other indicators that we have, even on that same plan, and not even going beyond the plan, but how the use of the London Food Bank can affect crime and safety, labor market participation, business health, income, mental health, physical health, substance use, and so on and so forth. To give another example, when wearing a little bit of my London Cycling hat and linking back to the GHG emissions example, we have cycling that it's a good example here to use, because it is a significant component of the climate emergency plan, but it's not mentioned at all at the recovery network. And as you can see here, and it's also my area of expertise. I'm pretty sure you guys have your own area expertise and you can make that same exercise that I'm doing here. But just to show how cycling can affect positively many of the areas, many of the indicators in the recovery framework. So how we're not considering those things. And again, just one example here, we can think about a few others when we're talking about integrating those networks. So I'm almost at the end. It's 7:40, and I just want to make the case for why and how the SDGs can actually be used. We need to have a dashboard, but we need to have one dashboard. And obviously all those plans, they are needed and are necessary. But the SDGs can be that framework that connect those plans into one single dashboard. And one mechanism, as I mentioned before, that cities are using already is the voluntary local review that are bringing together this into one place so we don't have multiple dashboards. The SDGs also, I mean, we already have the federal government supporting that. And even one of the indicators, if you notice, at the Canadian Indicator Framework is to ask how many municipal governments are using the SDGs. And there's funding to support that, not only nonprofits. The program that I'm running at Pillar Nonprofit Network is funded by the federal government, but they're also funding public and private organizations. Our universities are using, and you see Ivy Business School and Western talking more and more about SDGs. Fanshawe just ran a SDG lab, or I guess they're running today, this week. Businesses, especially the large ones, are using the SDGs more and more into their sustainability report, and the language that they use. And obviously the UNESCO City of Music, it's a strong link that we have the SDGs. So it's something that we can leverage, and it's not as hard as it looks. I know it looks like a complex framework, but we're not saying that we need to throw away the indicators and the plans. It actually can save us time, because as I was trying to show, there are a lot of overlap, and we can combine that work and save duplicate efforts that are looking at same targets with different action plans, and how we can actually bring together and leverage some of those indicators, thinking about how they impact the different plans in our city. And so SDGs will be helpful to connect those dots. And thinking about it at a more practical level, when I say connect dots, maybe I should say connect boxes. And as I was showing, even the indicators within the plan, they're very siloed into their specific area. It's pretty much using the SDG as the framework to connect those different plans at the high level, and at the lower level is to look at those indicators and really asking how they impact not just their specific area, but how they connect to the other areas as well. Again, this could really leverage the decision making that we need when we're choosing, because we know we have limited resources and limited capacity, when we're choosing which action, which strategy we want to take to further our implementation in the city. It is a proven model, like I mentioned, the 4 cities. So the Canadian, I'm calling it like the Canadian SDG model for cities. Key elements for that model is buy-in from the city, support from universities and colleges, local university and colleges in that city, and is usually led by a civil society organization that is leading the process. The 4 examples of the cities that I gave earlier, they have the British Columbia Council for International Cooperation leading the process, the SDSN Canada, along with the University of Waterloo, leading the work at the City of Waterloo. City of Winnipeg have the IISD, and the City of Peterborough, the Kawarda World International. I forgot what the C stands for. But anyway, all civil society organizations, nonprofit organizations as Pillar and Urban League that are leading the work that those cities are doing in implementing and integrating the SDGs into their different plans. And yeah, I think that's what I had to share with you for today. I'll just stop sharing my screen and I see if we have any questions.
So we have a question there from Laura. Laura, did you want to go ahead and ask your question?
I think actually when I posted it, it was before Luis got to the point that our recently released community or climate emergency action plan. I was asking how aligned it was with the SDGs, but I think you did note that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Then we have a comment just saying how what an opportunity this is to build an advocacy agenda around all of this work. See any more comments in the chat, but if anyone has questions, feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask Luis.
Sorry, Luis, it's Norman Sproul here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm just curious. So, with respect to the what is the London plan, how correlated is that with the with what you're talking about with the SDGs?
So the London plan does address pretty much every one of the SDGs. And I think I showed in one of my slides, it's a work that City Studio London did by mapping the London plan within the SDGs and even bringing some suggestions and recommendations. So yeah, like there is a strong alignment of the London plan with the SDGs.
So,
and I think my main point, sorry, Norman, if I can just compliment, is that my main point is that, and I think it's a great plan. My main point is how we connect the London plan with the climate emergency plan, with the recovery plan, that at this point, they do reference each other, but it seems to be, they're not really integrated. They're referencing each other, but they're not really integrated. Sorry to.
okay, so with respect to, because you were talking about, when you show the slide with respect, for example, to the use of automobiles and public transportation and everything else like that. London is a car-addicted city, primarily because it has sprawled and is continuing to sprawl, and yet there is, generally speaking, an awful lot of objection to the concept of infill. Like one of the reasons cities like Toronto, for example, people will live there but never own a car for entire lives is because they can literally get out and go on a bike or walk to work, whatever, winter, spring, summer, fall. But in London, if you're living in Oak Ridge and you are working downtown, you have very, very few choices. And in fact, it's almost as though the choice is made for you by the fact that you have, a Oxford Street that runs straight into town type of thing. So, whether or not you're getting public transportation or a vehicle, and 99% I would say would take a vehicle. So I guess I'm just trying to reconcile the concept of how this argument towards SDGs would work towards encouraging more infill, contra to the sort of, I don't want to say anti-development, but the concept of developing the downtown. to the point that people can live and work and enjoy the downtown to that degree.
That's the $1 million question, Norman, how to actually implement that. I think the one way that the SDGs can help, again, it's by showing those connections. It's by showing what we have to gain by choosing one option or the other. Sometimes, and again, I was using cycling and electric vehicles because that's my expertise, but you can talk about food security, you can talk about homelessness. Sometimes when you're looking at those plans, they are analyzing that from a specific lens, right? It's climate emergency, or it's economic recovery, or it's like social justice. And then we make decisions based on those specific lenses. Then what if we can make decisions that we can look at the impact that we have not only on that specific plan, but in multiple areas. And again, if you want me to give an example of how public transit and cycling goes beyond reducing GHG emissions, you can talk to Carol Stewart, for example, for the Employment Sector Council, and she'll tell you that one of the challenges that we have for employment is that a lot of those people, they don't have access to the workplaces because they don't have access to a vehicle, because they are low income, and they don't want to. And if they have easy access to public transit or cycling, they could get to those jobs, and we can have more people employed if we created a safe and reliable and convenient network for public transit and cycling. Like some of the shifts, they start 5:43. You need to be there at 5:43. And as you're saying, you know, our model of sprawling and our model of urban development is not conducive for cycling and public transit, and this is hindering our economic development. And all those green boxes that I linked to cycling and the community recovery networks, I can give you many examples on how active transportation, cycling and transit could benefit those different areas. For me, what the SDGs can do is to show those connections again, and then we can make those decisions. Maybe even cycling is not the best decision for the city. Maybe there are other options, but we're still not seeing all those connections. We're still like looking at boxes in a hierarchical structure.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question at all?
Oh yeah, to some degree. I mean, I mean, the one thing, like, unlike you, I'm a fair weather cyclist, which means above 10 degrees and dry. So I'm not cycling right now, but I'm sure I'm not the only one who thinks the same way. So yes, the problem with public transport is that you have designated routes to get from A to B, and people still have to, you know, dredge through the snow to get 500 meters or whatever to get to a bus stop, and then dredge another 500 meters to their work, which I fully understand. So maybe the city should be looking at ideas of bringing the workplaces to the neighborhoods. Anyway,
Yeah.
But thank you. Yeah.
That's the kind of solutions or ideas that we can have when we start to look at a more holistic way into things. Absolutely.
Thanks, Louise. Yeah.
And Carol, I noticed you were unmuted. I don't know if you had a question for Louise.
I did just want to ask, I'm unclear what VLR stands for. What does that mean?
Carol, VLR is a voluntary local review. Is a report that integrates all the plans that a city has into one single framework using the SDGs. So
And yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say it derives from the voluntary national review. There was something that the United Nations, a mechanism that the United Nations created for the countries to report back to it. And some cities started to also create their own local reviews on top of the national reviews.
And is London doing that?
No, London is not doing that. No.
Thank you.
The cities that in Canada are doing that, a few of them I mentioned on my presentation.
The four that you listed, like the Waterloo, those ones are doing it.
Yeah, Winnipeg, Kelowna, Waterloo, Peterborough.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I marked those down. I just want to jump back to the creative cities. And some people from the Urban League might be able to answer this as well as you. My understanding of creative city was that while Gord Hume was involved in council, the council voted and designated us a creative city. And then my understanding is they voted it out. Am I correct in that? Are we a creative city now?
Maybe someone can answer that question better than I do.
I don't know. I know we're a music city and a bird friendly city, but I'm not sure about creative.
Okay. I
Yeah.
knew we got the bird friendly designation, and I don't think that's easy to get. But I don't see the policies, because you know what I'm working on. We don't want that development at Meadow Lily, because my understanding is it's like a 3 different flyover area. So it's like somehow the city got the designation. They must have met certain criteria, but then when they make the decisions, they don't take that into consideration. So that's, of course, an issue for us.
Yeah,
That's
plans
it.
only work when you follow them, right?
Right. So I need to find out more what the criteria was for them to achieve that designation. Because it doesn't appear as though it's being. So I can find that out. I mean, I will take that on and find that out. Thanks. That's it.
Yeah, just to clarify in the creative cities, the designation from UNESCO is Creative Cities Network, and there's 7 types. One of them is City of Music. So we are part of that bigger network. There are almost 300 cities. You know, there's City of Music, City of Literature, City of Design. I think Montreal is City of Design. We have 4 cities in Canada that are part of the network, but it's the first City of Music.
So we have a comment from Skylar, which I actually really love, is just about 15 minutes neighborhoods. You know, it'd be so great if you could sort of have everything, and circling back to what Norman was mentioning, and, you know, having work, school, and just everything around your neighborhood, right? That would be such a great place and time to be in. And we've got a question from Paul. Just a question following up on the idea of voluntary reviews, local or national. Has any jurisdiction that you're aware of mandated these reviews?
Mandated.
Yeah, I can clarify what I'm thinking of there, Luis. Like, you know, because sort of used to, from talking to you, I'm used to the concept of the voluntary review, right? I'm thinking of, you know, in the way in which, you know, a provincial jurisdiction can mandate a community and safety, or, you know, community well-being plan. Say, like, every city has to have a community well-being plan. So I'm wondering if anywhere globally that you're aware of, you know, if any nation or any, you know, any provincial jurisdiction anywhere has required of, you know, cities or states that they do a review, you know, just sort of ready. I'm thinking again, I think the other thing I'm thinking as context for this, I'm thinking like of Seth Klein's, like, identifying when something is an emergency, but identifying when something is a high enough priority that you make it not voluntary anymore. You're like, you got to do this.
Right. It becomes a MLR instead of VLR. It's a mandatory local review.
Yeah, the involuntary local review.
I don't, not to my knowledge, no, I don't think so. And we have voluntary local reviews all over the world. We have, you know, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia. We have a few in the States, a few here that, like I mentioned, but I don't think anywhere in the world it's mandatory. No.
Yeah. So I'm wondering about, you know, Agenda 2050, and however far we get for 2030 with the current UN Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, I wonder if that's something we could learn from, that there's been very uneven uptake. We can't compare all of the points where we would want to compare across jurisdictions because the uptake is so uneven, and already, to put it in the language of the SDGs, already so many jurisdictions were left behind, and didn't really get to fully participate because they didn't have the means to take on voluntary reviews. So I wonder if that's a piece of learning that, if we really want everybody to do it, we find a way to make them.
That's a good point.
And Luis, go ahead.
Sorry. I saw Laura's question. What will it take for us to have a London voluntary report? I think it's mostly commitment from the city to integrate those plans. Like I said, the heavy lifting is done. Like those plans, they have a lot of information there. They have a lot of, there's a gold mine of data into a lot of those plans. It's really connecting those dots, and I can see here a pillar with City Studio and how City Studio connects real projects in the City of London with universities and students, and the appetite on those universities in support SDG work. There's a great opportunity to really leverage that, that program like City Studio, and they are already committed to the SDGs. They even map all the projects that they have with the SDGs and everything, to really use that program to move forward with voluntary local review. But again, we need the buy-in from the city. Doesn't make any sense to do this without them.
Great, thanks so much, Luis. Just, I guess a final question for you is, what can we do as individuals? What would be like a call to action for, just as individuals and as neighborhood or community groups? What would you say is something that anyone can sort of do to move this agenda forward?
I think we're about to start our new strategic plan. If there's support from neighborhood groups, and maybe a first step is to raise awareness about the importance of having a one dashboard and not multiple plans, yes, but multiple plans that are really integrated. So in their next strategic plan, we can really have that connection, that view, that holistic view. I think would be a great progress for us if the neighborhoods can support that. So we're raising awareness about SDGs in neighborhood and communities, and then supporting the VLR in the new cycle of a strategic plan.
Great, thank you so much. And I know I said that was the last question, but this one really is, and then we have to move on with the agenda. But where do you think the sticking points are with the city or council? Is Christine's question.
Well, I think we have now at least one councillor that is very supportive of the SDGs. I really don't know the level of awareness that councillors has around the SDGs. And I'm hoping with the Unesco City of Music designation, there's a space to talk more about that and raise awareness. I think obviously the main question is, we already read hundreds of thousands of pages of reports. Are you saying you want to create another one? And I think that, like I said, the main point is I actually want to reduce that work because I think a lot of those reports are duplicating efforts. So I want to reduce duplication with one dashboard and not multiple ones. I think that's what needs to come across, that it's not creating extra work, trying to reduce the work that we have so far.
Well, Luis, thank you again so much for joining us and really for giving us an introduction for some of us to this and for others, just a reminder of how important it is to raise awareness and learn more. Just thanks for taking the time to join us. Really appreciate it. And then you're welcome anytime if you want to come back and chat a little bit more once once you're in those next steps of your project. So thank you. And then I'll pass it on to Skylar.
Thanks, Marina. Happy to be virtually here.